No singing today, unfortunately, but you can catch other people, other musicians singing on Fridays. So throughout South Asian Heritage Month, we've got a mehfil series and we'll have um, artists singing for you there. But this is not about me today. Just wait for a few more people to join and obviously wait for Ravinder to join. But for those that are here, welcome to South Asian Heritage Month UK. It's the first time that it's being celebrated in the UK. Now, I want to point out that Benita Kane, Anita Rani, and Jasveer Singh from City Seeks, they actually launched this initiative last year at the Houses of Parliament. That was a soft launch, and we caught wind of that. The idea that it was being celebrated, and we wanted to put the spotlight on people who may not have been acknowledged on that larger platform, people that we admire, people who we feel have inspired us, and they are storytellers in their own right, contributing to the idea of shared heritage. Okay, we've got Ravinder here now. Hi Ravinder, I'll send you a request in a few minutes. I'll just let a few more people join. So for those that have joined, I'll give it about 5 minutes or so because we all know Asians and their timing. Fashionably late. But we do have Ravinder Bhogal, chef patron of Jikoni, London in Marylebone. She has joined us and will be kickstarting this South Asian Heritage Month series. I will also be turning off the comments and switching them back on for the last 15 minutes or so. So that gives everybody an opportunity to ask their questions. It can get distracting if the questions are coming up here while we're talking. So there will be an opportunity at the end. Please do share your questions, your comments, your feedback. At the end, there will be about 15 to 20 minutes, depending on this conversation, for everyone to contribute their questions and comments. So let's get Ravinder on and test this.
Hello.
Jambo,
How are you?
I'm really, really good. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. Great.
We're
All the
really
better for
excited.
speaking to you.
We're really excited to have you here. Just wanna, I did say I was gonna switch off the comments, but before I do, just wanna check if someone can put a thumbs up that the sound is okay for both of us. So Ravinder, if you just wanna say Jambo, just to test the sound.
Jambo. How
Can
is
everyone?
everyone this evening?
Yes, how is everybody? Thank you for, okay, we've got a thumbs up
Great.
so they can hear us. I'll give it another minute or so, Ravinder, but thank you for taking the time out to be part of this. We're really, really excited. So glad that you agreed to be part of this. And Ravinder's just reopened her restaurant after lockdown and
Yeah.
published her second book. So she's very busy, but still agreed to take time out for us. So
My
Asante sana.
pleasure.
Thank
My
you.
pleasure. My pleasure. I'm just adjusting this. Is the light okay? Can you see me all right?
I can see you. Can everyone else see Ravinder? Thumbs up if you can hear and see us. We want you to get the most out of this conversation. So if you
Great.
can just comment, you can see and hear us, and then we'll start. Is the
Brilliant.
sound?
Okay, good.
Yeah.
People
Okay,
saying yes. Good.
okay, great, great. Right, I'm going to switch the comments off and then turn them on about 8:45. So you can comment while I've switched them off, and they'll just reappear. Or if not, at the end, whatever questions you've got, comments, just put them in the comment section. But for ease and make to ensure we don't get distracted, I'm going to turn them off now.
Great.
Okay. So Jambo, Sat Sri Akal, Namaste, Assalamu Alaikum, and welcome to our South Asian Heritage Month UK, where today the feature is Flavours from the Subcontinent, and we're really, really honoured. I say we, I should actually make apologies on my sister's behalf. She's not feeling well. So it's me today, but I will continue to say we. We are very honoured that Ravinder Bhogal has joined us today to discuss lots of things, but namely her second cookbook. This is back
I
to
have
front.
mine here too.
You have yours? Okay, snap. Now, back to front, but
you get
this
the
time
idea.
you get the idea through the, the imagery, the bright colors, which Ravinder's going to explain. A few people yesterday, I did a live a reading, and they were asking, why you've chosen birds. And, we've got the mango here, guava, papaya, pomegranate, cardamom, star anise there. We've got all these exotic, I say in air quotes, ingredients, and it's such a colorful book. So what I want to do is just introduce you formally, Ravinder. So I'm going to read something that I put together to introduce you for those that may not be familiar with who you are. So, a former beauty journalist, Ravinder Bhogal knows exactly what the recipe for success looks and tastes like. In 2007, Ravinder participated in and won Gordon Ramsay's reality TV series, The F Word. And since then, she has published an award-winning debut cookbook, Cook in Boots. So that was her first book. Presented multiple BBC TV programs in the UK and India, and written a number of articles on food and culture. Ravinder opened her first restaurant, Jikoni, in Marylebone, London in September 2016. And the word Jikoni translates to kitchen in Swahili. Jikoni is influenced by Ravinder's own mixed heritage, and the creative medley of Asian, East African, and British food she serves at her restaurant is a reflection of this. Jikoni also aims to celebrate the legacy of the maternal figures who shared their culinary wisdom, never recorded ink on paper, but sung down the generations like feminine gospels. In July 2020, Ravinder published her second cookbook, Jikoni, proudly Inauthentic Recipes from an Immigrant Kitchen, which we will be discussing. So before we do, just an icebreaker, some fun, a rapid fire round to get to know you.
Wow, I thought that comes at the end when I'm nice and relaxed.
I thought we'll do that now, because obviously people they had some questions, so I thought we'll do that at the end. So
okay, fine.
No pressure. There's no right or wrong answer, whatever you want to say. So, for those of you that don't know, during lockdown, Ravinder put together some nourishing packages, food packages called Comfort and Joy. So my question to you is, and it's rapid fire round, a meal that brings you comfort and joy.
Anything my mother has cooked, but her just simple things, dal, rice, that's my favorite kind of thing. She used to make this incredible tur dal, which was slightly influenced by our Gujarati neighbors, which just brings me complete joy when I eat it. And it always has to be cooked by her. Nobody else's will do. It's just her knack, her hand, mother's hand.
Yeah. First thing you learned to cook, could be food, could be a drink.
I think everyone has some sort of clumsy foray into baking. That's normally your first kind of clumsy foray into cooking. And I remember my mom used to make naan katais, and they'd be what she would do is she would lay them out, roll them out, lay them out, and then she would give us a knife, just the tip of the knife, and you'd have to make a cross in the middle of them, just a tiny little cross, and then you'd go around and you'd dip a little matchbox, the tip of a matchstick, into red dye, and you would, in the center of that sort of cross, you do a little red dot, and it always reminded me of a bindi and a frown. And I remember having that really, really visual image. And that was the kind of first kitchen job. And then, other things like podding peas. In Kenya, you didn't have supermarkets. You kind of, well, you did, but mainly you shopped at markets and you shopped in bulk. So I remember these huge sacks of green peas, and I'd be sitting on a red plastic stool with a red bucket podding them, and often there'd be a caterpillar or something creepy crawly that would make me squeal.
Well, we actually did that with our Nani ji as well. So we're going to touch on this, how food is very nostalgic. And you've just described the red bucket, the caterpillar. And I remember that we spent time out on our knees, and the pastime, you didn't have phones or anything. And their idea of, I suppose, you getting involved and having fun was shelling peas. So yeah, we
Yeah.
can relate to that as well. A dish you enjoy making?
Do you know, I love, if I'm cooking for someone, whatever it is, I love doing it. Whether it's, just scrambled eggs for my husband in the morning, or whether it's cooking something in my restaurant. I think if you're a cook, or a chef, you cook because you want to feed. And so as long as I'm feeding someone, I'm happy whatever I'm cooking.
So then that brings me on to a dish you dislike, which there probably may not be.
A dish that I personally dislike eating or cooking.
Both?
Okay, so dislike cooking. I think anything that involves too much patience. I'm very impatient. So I sort of, even with baking and stuff, I have to be in the right mood, the right frame of mind, because it's a science and it's very technical, and you can't, the kind of cookery that comes natural to me is very much about intuition and what we call andaza. And so that sort of throwing this in, knowing, sensing, smelling when something is ready, when the next spice is ready to go. I like that because it's about the interplay between you as the cook and the ingredients, and that relationship that you have. Whereas with baking, it's a science. Everything has to be very measured. You have to follow a recipe. So I have less patience for things like that. And then I always say, I'm not a baker, but then the desserts at Jikoni are so popular. It astounds me.
Banana cake is the miso syrup one with the Ovaltine kulfi. When I saw that on your menu, I thought, oh, Ovaltine kulfi, miso syrup. But that first bite, so Moorish. And I know that's one of the most popular dishes. Actually, that was one of the questions, but maybe there might be something else. A dish that reminds you of Africa.
A dish that reminds me of Africa. That's a tough one. I think rather than a dish, it's like little things, like it's the fruits, the guavas, the jamons, the things that we don't really get here, the pink guavas that I was particularly fond of. There's a story about that in the book. Things like baobabs. So when we were little, there was this thing, we call them mabuyus or buyas, and I think anyone East African Indian will relate, but they were basically, like, baobab is like a big health food thing right now, but back in the day we would have them.
I've heard of that.
And they would put loads of sugar and red food dye, and you would buy them from the kiosk and sort of suck on them, and they would dye your mouth red. They were really bad for you, actually. And it's the kind of thing I have this ache for. And like, if ever I go now to Kenya or find a source here and I buy them and I eat them, my husband really disapproves because of the red food coloring and everything. But I just can't help it. It's a taste of my childhood.
Yeah, I think you mentioned that in the book, that you said it stained your lips like red lipstick. And as a child, as a young girl, it's a delight to have lipstick on, right?
That was not the baobab, that was the red devils, these ice lollies.
Okay.
So like
right.
when the ice cream man came around, I always wanted, my mother would be like, okay, you can have an ice cream, you can have a little mini cup, a junior cup of like ice cream, which I thought was really boring. I wanted the red devils that were so red that they dyed your mouth red. And I think I kind of liked them because they made it look like you were wearing lipstick, which for a 5-year-old girl is very exciting.
I can resonate with that. Your food icons.
My food icons are definitely people like Madhur Jaffrey. Watching a woman of color, watching someone who looked like you early on, that really kind of captured my imagination. And I was lucky enough to meet her earlier in the year, and she is just exquisite. She's an extraordinary woman. who, you know, she's just so sharp, she's so intelligent, she knows everything about everything. And, you know, the day that she came to the restaurant, I actually had to go to shoot. I was shooting the book at that time. And so I spent some time with her, and I was so gutted because I'd been booked for this shoot, so I had to leave. And so I left her in my husband's capable hands. She was waiting for her husband to come and pick her up. So he kept her company. And when I was so jealous because he like had a whole 45 minutes chatting to her, just the two of them. And I said to him afterwards, so tell me everything. What was it like? And he said, well, I can tell you this, there is absolutely no impressing an 85-year-old woman. Anything I'd done, she'd done 10 times over. It's like she knew about everything. So, you know, people like her, people like Nigella Lawson. I remember I was working at Selfridges. I must have been about 18 or 19 years old when How to Eat came out, her book. And I remember sort of saving up my money and buying a copy of this book in the Selfridges bookshop. And those train journeys home, which, you know, used to take me an hour and a half to get into town. And I would just read this book like it was a storybook. And it just presented, you know, it was like, and I said this to her recently because she was very kind and she tweeted about my book, which was a real moment for me. And I said to her, I bought your book, How to Eat, when I was, you know, shop girl at Selfridges. And when I was reading it, it was like someone had opened a window and let light and air in. And it was like, and I think that's how inspiration works. It strikes you, and then it can take years to affect you properly, but it was there. She'd lit that light. And I really do credit her for that, because she's just, aside from being, you know, cook and her television personality and all of that, beyond all of that, she is just the most luminous writer, and I respect that about her so much. She writes so beautifully.
I think I'll say that about you after reading this book as well.
Aww.
How you described, you know, that light of inspiration, that window, and then that light comes in. That's how I read it in one sitting, this book. So we'll go into detail in a bit. We're nearly finished rapid fire round, but it's not just recipes. It's recipes married with stories from Ravinder's childhood. So I haven't read Nigella Lawson's one, but I can only imagine the way you described it's very similar to how I felt reading this. You know, we'll talk about it in a moment. Favorite Kenyan, Punjabi, and British ingredient that you like to use?
Okay, so Kenyan ingredient would be things like, well, actually, this time I was really surprised. My husband and I went in December to go and visit his family. He has family out there. And, you know, back in the day, everything used to be imported in Kenya. So, you know, if you wanted decent cheese, you'd have to import it, you know, things like mozzarella, cheddar even. It was all imported. But now what is really beautiful is that people are making everything locally. So you get, you know, local feta cheese, local mascarpone. Look, I find that wonderful that people are so foodie and so enthusiastic and so knowledgeable, and are creating these little artisan hubs of making things, which I love. So that, and then, you know, all, like I said, keep saying all the fruits that you don't get here, like the pink guavas, the jamuns, all of that kind of stuff. I love. British ingredient that I really love, it would have to be Maldon sea salt. You know, my cooking is not the same. I mean, even in the kitchen at Jikoni, I don't use ordinary salt. I only use Maldon sea salt or Cornish sea salt. And I just think it's a fantastic ingredient. It's never as hard or harsh as like a table salt. So I think, you know, Great British sea salt, why not? And then in terms of Indian ingredient, I would say curry leaves, fresh curry leaves, because there is nothing, they are so unique. There's no substitute for them. You can't replace them with anything else. Nothing else tastes like them. You know, normally you can substitute things, but they are so unique. They're so off themselves, and I love that about them. And I love the smell of them. As soon as they hit the oil, you're in South India, and I love that.
Yeah. I mean, I recently made pakore, and I've made them before, but I put the curry leaves in, and they completely transformed it. And
Yeah.
it's just such a magical ingredient. So I completely agree with you there. And finally, what would your last meal on earth be? A bit morbid.
Well, I think again it would be anything cooked by my mother, whether it was her Sunday morning parathas or
Yeah.
her dal and rice, her curry chol, that kind of
Mm,
stuff. I just, I die for that stuff. And now, I am so busy with work. I don't see my mother as often as I'd like. So I really, really crave her food. And there's nobody who can cook those things like she can.
mm,
And even though she's taught me how to make things, even when I make them, they're not quite the same.
mm. No, no,
There's
you get
nothing
that.
like somebody else, especially your mother making you those
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, completely. I mean, I only saw my mum about 2, 3 weeks ago after lockdown, and the first thing she did, as soon as we went for a walk, as soon as I picked her up, she handed me a plastic box of um, oatmeal flapjacks, which I love, and that's the first thing she did, and that is, synonymous of a mother's love to not say anything but just shove food,
Yeah,
into your hand, and it might have been in a simple plastic box, but it's that gesture that
yeah,
she thought, okay, my daughter's coming to see me after 4 months. I'm going to make something for her to take home, and that's the mother's touch, isn't it? The language
yeah.
of love of mother, I would say. So thank you for the rapid fire round. Hopefully, people have a bit more of an idea of who you are if they didn't know already. Let's go on to the cookbook.
Hmm.
So Ravinder has a restaurant named Jikoni in London, Marylebone, which is so beautiful. And you feel, as soon as I stepped in, I felt like I was in my grandmother's kitchen, which I know that was intentional for you in terms of aesthetics to make people feel they are in their grandmother's or mother's kitchen. And if you haven't been, you'll know what I mean. But so yeah, this is your second cookbook named after your restaurant. Proudly Inauthentic Recipes from the Immigrant Kitchen. So two questions. If you can explain the reason why you have these very colorful birds and what you mean by proudly inauthentic recipes. Now for me, and this is my interpretation, I see that as a very defiant, very bold statement, very sort of political statement. But I'd like you to just expand on the visuals of the book. What do these birds
Okay.
represent, and
Well,
the title?
sure. Well, I mean, like you, I really enjoy literature and I particularly love poetry. And I've read poems for as long as I can remember, and they have moved me. Like some people are moved by paintings. I think for me, I'm very moved by words on a page. And there was one poet that I read over and over again and still do. And every time I read him, I find something new, I discover something new. And oftentimes I think that some of the words of his that I have read are so deeply entrenched in me, subconsciously, and I find myself thinking in sort of terms of his words or concepts. And so when we were putting together the book, originally the cover was a very different cover, and it was a
Mm,
lovely cover, but my publishers were slightly confused by it and slightly not 100% for it. So they kind of
mm,
sent us back with a very short timeline and said, okay, come up with another cover idea. And it was my husband's company who designed the cover, actually. So he runs a studio called Creative Family in Notting
mm,
Hill. And so him and his business partner helped me design it. But the idea very much had to obviously come from me because I understood what the book was about and what it was
mm,
representing. And the illustrator is a lovely chap called Adam Grout, who's my husband's business partner. And he hand painted all those birds. And actually, in about 2 or 3 days, all the fruits, birds, everything, we
mm,
worked on the typography together and everything. And
mm,
so going back to this poet who is called Derek Walcott, he had written
mm.
a poem which I'd read called The Season of Phantasmal Peace, which I just
Wow.
think, firstly, as a title, it's so breathtaking. And it was the opening lines. I've written them down just because I knew I would fluff up remembering them if I tried to under all this pressure.
Yeah.
But the opening lines are, then all the nations of birds lifted together the huge net of the shadows of this earth in multitudinous dialects, twittering tongues, stitching and crossing it. And that, you know, the thought of multitudinous tongues, multitudinous dialects, twittering tongues, really sort of took me back to the idea of immigrants coming in with all their different languages. And it's that kind of cross-pollination of ideas. You know, I think of them like hummingbirds. You know, they're extracting nectar from flowers, but yet they're pollinating too. And I just think it's such a powerful and beautiful image, and that image of birds as immigrants felt very, very right. I've always been obsessed with birds anyway. I just think they're such exquisite creatures and such symbolism.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly when I saw it. I thought, well, the birds denote migration anyway, and I wanted you to explain it to everybody because it's obviously your book. And something else I took away from the cover, particularly in relation to birds, is how they have the ability to adapt to the environment and make a home out of anything, out of scraps, which is what our families and ancestors had to do when they migrated all across the world. Like a bird can make a home out of twigs, and it's a comfortable nest that they make. Our parents, just like these birds, migrated and had to do the same. And that's how I saw that the imagery of the book, with the birds as well. So,
and you know, I've always also related to the idea of a bird as a sort of feminine force, because as you know, in Punjabi, all these songs that talk about Chiriya da Chamba and all of this, it's deeply entrenched. So it felt right that the book should have these birds and some of my favorite ingredients as well. All these fruits that I talk about aching for, you know, these fruits that really, really remind me of my childhood have found their way. The curry leaves are there, and you know, spices and pistachios and all these little bits and pieces.
Favorite.
So Adam did a fantastic job. I'm sure I drove them mad because, of course, when it's your husband's company, you can have as many goes as you like. So it's just like, no, do it again, do it. But actually, he didn't need too much doing over. He just very naturally got how he wanted everything. Yeah, he's done a fantastic job.
Really, it is. And for me, I said yesterday in the reading that there's a chapter in here where you describe you came to England as a child and you often visited, but there was this one time where you realized you're never going back home as in Kenya. And the juxtaposition of what you've described, I've got it here. You're living on top of a shop, and you've described this shop. Is it shop? Yeah, shambolic shop. You've described it as a frigidly cold flat, very much in need of a woman's touch. And you've described this open, haggard building set against a terrifying Milky Way of artificial lights. I think that's such brilliant use of language in comparison to what you were accustomed to: creepers, colossal German trees, rugged open terrain, and the way that you have constantly described Kenya here as how your grandfather, he fell in love with the red-earthed blossoming landscape. And I just think when we compare and contrast your experience, as we all know, this gloomy grey England, to this vibrant colour, which for me, it symbolizes the vibrance of Kenya. And my husband, his mother's side are from Kenya, originally followed the same journey as your family, Punjab, Kenya, Britain. And they have such admiration for Kenya that you know, that so much, most of their memories are about their time in Kenya, and the way they describe it is how you've described it in this book.
Yeah, and I think, you know, with Kenya, I will say this, that your love for, I mean, I was 7 when I left, but that love and that desire for it endures. It's such an enduring and powerful force, because Kenya is the most bewitching place. And actually, as much as you leave it, it never leaves you. It holds on to you, it clings on. And there is just something so magical about it that sort of fired my imagination as a child, that made me long for it all my, even my, in my adulthood, when I go home, or when I mean, I consider the UK home now, but when I go back to Kenya and I, you know, come onto the tarmac, you know, getting off the flight, I feel earthed immediately. You know, it's my place of birth. I'm connected to it. That red earth still very much runs through my veins.
Beautiful. Yes. And that imagery runs throughout this book. You constantly, in the stories, as I said, this is recipes married with stories. And the stories, there is this yearning that you've described for Kenya. And when you've gone back and things are not the same, and of course, people have moved on, the times have evolved, and it's not going to be the same. But um, that nostalgia is very, very clear in this book, and it appealed to me as someone who's always had a desire to know her mother-in-law, who, you know, my husband's mum, who passed away when he was 11. And when I was reading this book to him, he has very fragmented memories of his mum. But when I read this to him, it was for him comfort and solace, and he described it as he received his mum's hug from this book, and also from your restaurant, which we've been to. And that's why we go back. We've gone often because I said this yesterday as well. It's not just about making food. Food is not just about something that you put in your mouth and tantalizing experience on your tongue. It's more than that. It tells stories, it connects people. Food is so powerful in that way. And we know in the Sikh faith that the communal kitchen, the langar, is you know, this free kitchen. It's not just about feeding the hungry and the homeless. It's about love. And you've mentioned that here, that Jikoni for you is an extension of that community kitchen, where you can use food to expand on the feeling of love. What I wanted to speak about, Ravinder, is you've mentioned in this book how you were bullied for your accent as a schoolgirl. If you could talk about that and the idea of reclaiming your tongue and decolonization.
Yeah, so we talked about this the other day. And actually, if anyone is around on Sunday, I've actually written a big piece in the Observer. So there's a piece about this coming out. And I think it's really important that we are beginning to have these conversations now. Yeah. And I feel very strongly, actually, even in the subconscious thing of calling my restaurant Jikoni, is that for so long I had tried to assimilate myself into a version of Englishness into which I could never fit. It's impossible. I look different. I move differently. I think different. Our language is often lost in translation. The sorts of concepts that we have and the thought that we sometimes have in our language, there are words that are not translatable. There are feelings or concepts that are not translatable into English directly. And so I think so much is lost in that, you know, and I love English, and I studied English, and I write in English, and it's something that I really, really love. But also when you kind of look at our history, it was the language of the colonizer, you know, and I have been quite determined in a way to decolonize my experience and to not have it cauterized. I think so often we are put into boxes. This is who you are. You're British, you're Indian, you're an Indian girl, so therefore you must cook Indian food. And the amount of commissions I have asking me to cook curries, and that's fine, but you know, there's so much more to me than that. I'm British, I'm Indian, I'm East African. I'm also the product of all the wonderful, warm immigrant communities that are so diverse in London, that have given me hospitality, shown me kindness, that are part of me. And I wanted to express that. And I think when I created Jikoni, firstly, even calling it Jikoni, I was adamant that I would call my restaurant a word that belonged to my heritage, that belonged to my language. I feel very passionate about it now. And I was determined that I would educate people about what my culture is. So, for example, we have a dish on the menu called kukupaka, and people are like, what is it? And I'm like, well, it's an East African Indian hybrid chicken curry. Well, why don't you just call it a chicken curry? And I'm like, well, I've been colonized once and I'm not going to be colonized again. Thank you very much. And I will call it a kukupaka because that is exactly what it is.
Yes,
And
exactly.
I will educate you about that. And it gives me so much pride to see my team as well. Our team at Jikoni are so engaged with what we do. And, you know, they love explaining to people what these words mean, and they have taken time and effort to learn, you know, because they don't come from my culture, but they're so bought into the whole experience of representing the true diversity that makes Britain great, you know. So
Exactly.
I think in creating Jikoni, I have finally carved a place in which I finally feel that I fit into, that I belong to. And it's in Marylebone in London. It's so international and it feels so right that it's
Yeah.
there.
I mean, when I first walked into it, I knew about it, and I walked in, and I immediately on the left, as soon as you walk in, there's a photograph of your grandfather who you so fondly talk about in this book. And he's a Sardar.
Yes.
And you don't expect to walk into a London restaurant in Marylebone and see a photo of a Sardar with a long, beard and a turban. And my husband has a small beard and a turban. And immediately he saw that photo and he felt at home. He felt comforted before you even tasted the food, experienced the customer service. For people like us who look like us, that it's an embrace, it's a hug, and that's rare, And I remember I wrote out to you to share that I was really moved by it, and then subsequently the food was great, and so was the service. But I remember I reached out. If I'm really moved by something, my sister and I, if we're really touched by something, we will write, as in pen to paper, not even email. And we wrote to you to let you know, because
It
with
was such a
any,
lovely moment to receive that letter. It really was. It meant so much.
I mean, the reason why we did that is because opening any business, for that matter, let alone a restaurant, it's your baby. It's such a challenging thing, right? And as much as it's a success for you, we acknowledged the challenges you may have faced. And in those moments that we all have inevitably in life, where we, peaks and troughs, in those moments where we feel the world is on top of us, sometimes things like that, they are the fuel that keep us going. And I just wanted to reach out and let you know, because even the music, it's a very aesthetically pleasing restaurant with very dainty sort of tablecloths that remind you of your grandmother's home. But the music, I remember, I'm a very visual person. The music was Coke Studio, which I love, and ranging from Coke Studio to African beats to English music, completely reflecting the medley of heritage through food, through the sounds, through the sight. So there's subtle nods to Africa in the bathroom. There's like where you put your coat on, behind your bag, little giraffe and a little zebra. Everything is very consciously curated to make anyone who I feel personally is an immigrant with the South Asian experience of moving from India, East Africa, or Britain, or just straight from India to England, you can relate to that and you feel it's a home away from home. And I salute you for that, because there's not many of those kind of restaurants. But also, you're a female, something I want to touch on as well. A female in a very male-dominated space, and ironically, we get told as women of our origin, South Asian origin, that you belong in the kitchen. A woman belongs in the
Yeah.
kitchen. And something you wrote here, you said, cooking is a highly skilled and often selfless endeavor, especially when it is women who are doing the feeding. As I watched my grandmother, mother, aunts, and sisters join the cult of domesticity, I felt restless and inwardly rebelled at the drudgery of it all. Yet, you've created a restaurant. So,
Yeah.
if you wouldn't mind just touching on that, I thought that was amazing. And you have said that having your own space was liberating. That when
Yeah.
you had your kitchen, so
that's a whole other funny story. But I feel very strongly that, yeah, you know, often it can be, you know, like a drudgery. You know, you cook, you clean, and you know, my mother just said to me, you know, you'll cook for your husband and children, and you have to learn to cook so that you can get married and marry well, and you know, your husband will be happy with you if you know how to make dal and round rotis and all the rest of it. And I just felt that there was more, you know, that you could, I mean, it was when I was watching people like Madhur Jaffrey, Igella Lawson, that the penny kind of dropped, and I thought it doesn't have to be just your husband and your children.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I remember when I sort of got into cooking, and my mom wasn't best pleased with me. Weirdly, my father was. He completely understood. He had struggled to understand what I did when I was a beauty journalist. It just wasn't tangible to him. He just didn't understand it. He thought I was wasting my time. And then suddenly I was on television cooking, and I started cooking in other people's restaurants, doing pop-ups and everything. And as an immigrant, as an Indian man who understood business, he suddenly got very excited. And, you know, he was like, you should open a restaurant, you should open a restaurant, and just kept saying it over and over to me. And my mom was like, okay, well, who's going to want to marry you if you've got a restaurant and you're working these crazy hours and, you know, carrying ingredients across London, and it's not a work for a girl. And I was really determined.
Yeah. How ironic that.
Yeah, exactly. So you're fine to cook for your husband and children, but God forbid anyone pay you to do it. My God. And
God.
and you know, it was actually, I had been doing a 6-week pop-up at a place called South Place Hotel, and this is before the restaurant. And I'd been, you know, I'd been doing pop-up after pop-up, and you know, takeovers and all sorts of things, private catering. And there'd been a few critics who'd been coming regularly to the things I was doing. And at the end of that evening, actually, it was another female critic who asked to speak to me at the end of the evening. And of course, I was just terrified. I thought I'd done something wrong, because you always do as women. You never think it's going to be good. You always think it's something terrible. And she just sort of had this very funny conversation with me, and she just said, when are you going to stop being such a coward and commit to finding a space of your own, a room of your own? And it really reminded me of Virginia Woolf sort of saying that women should have a space of their own, you know, whether it's this sort of imaginary room in your head, or you know, just a space to be autonomous and do something for yourself. And it was that night, it took another woman, and I'd had male critics saying similar things to me, but it took another woman to give me that self-belief, to make me think that it was possible. And on that evening, that seed was sown, and there began. And by that time, I'd already birthed the idea of Jikoni, what it would be, what would look like if I had a restaurant. But I'd never had the confidence until another woman said. And this is why I think women are so powerful. And I love women. You know, I feel very strongly that particularly women in our communities are invisible, and they shouldn't be invisible on the page. Women of my mother's generation have not been written about, have not been talked about, and it's such a disservice. And I felt strongly that I wanted to write about them, that they should appear on my page.
I'm so glad that you said that, because that, you know, in the introduction, I did say that this is a celebration of the maternal wisdom, maternal figures and their culinary wisdom. And I think you've encapsulated that through your restaurant, through this book. You do talk quite a lot about your grandfather, who's clearly a very big influence, but time and time again, you come back to the different characters of women, the lazy, the woman who just sits there, work shy hands, and then the one who's kneading the dough, the atta, and she develops these muscly muscly body because of it. And then you've described your mum who's sleeping at night, and she's, how have you described that? There was a word that you used.
Mother.
Bone tired mother. We can all relate to these different female figures, but I love that it's a celebration of women. I believe in the power of sisterhood, and I'm glad that that's what you're doing with your restaurant as well. So
And
what we'll do
I
now.
think as well for me, I grew up in a society where, in Kenya, women didn't really work, but they were
Mm,
sometimes allowed to do little businesses or hobbies that made a little bit of money on the side. And
mm-hmm.
it was those women I really looked up to. In fact, the Mama Bogas, who are the women who would sell vegetables door to door, the African women who sold vegetables door to door,
Yeah,
they were my first sort of inspiration. They were my first sort of uh, view of female entrepreneurs, because these women were incredible. They were wily, they
mm,
were astute, they had made their own prosperity, and they changed the lives of their next generation. Some of
mm,
those mama bogas now, their children have become, degree holders, and it's
mm.
those women who did that. And and then I've written about the pickle maker as well, the
Yeah,
achar wali. Again, these are incredible women, and these women, as much as they're sort of inspired by characters, these stories are universal. They are completely universal, and
yeah.
they are every woman in a way. They are the pageant of womanhood that I talk about.
Completely, and I love that, and that's why another reason we were drawn to your restaurant. You mentioned about earlier on you mentioned the importance of the immigrants, contributing to this land with their twittering tongues. And I know you're a fan of literature, so I thought just before we take some questions, if you have questions now, I've turned the commenting on. Please do share your questions or comments or feedback here, and we'll try and get through them. Allowed about 15 minutes for that. But in the meantime, just wanting to read a poem which you may have come across or may not have, and I thought it fits really nicely with this session. It's a poem by Benjamin Zephaniah, and it's called British. Serves 60 million. Take some Picts, Celts, and Silures, and let them settle. Then overrun them with Roman conquerors. Remove the Romans after approximately 400 years. Add lots of Norman French to some, Angles, Saxons, Jutes, and Vikings, then stir vigorously. Mix some hot Chileans, cool Jamaicans, Dominicans, Trinidadians, and Bajans with some Ethiopians, Chinese, Vietnamese, and Sudanese. Then take a blend of Somalians, Sri Lankans, Nigerians, and Pakistanis, combine with some Guyanese, and turn up the heat. Sprinkle some fresh Indians, Malaysians, Bosnians, Iraqis, and Bangladeshis together with some Afghans, Spanish, Turkish, Kurdish, Japanese, and Palestinians. Then add to the melting pot. Leave the ingredients to simmer. As they mix and blend, allow their languages to flourish, binding them together with English. Allow time to be cool. Add some unity, understanding, and respect for the future. Serve with justice and enjoy. And then it says, note, all the ingredients are equally important. Treating one ingredient better than another will leave a bitter, unpleasant taste. And I
Fantastic.
think
How beautifully
I
put.
and I think that's what you I came across this a while ago, and I think that's what you've done with your restaurant. Getting the inspiration from your own heritage trail and that of many other South Asians, immigrants in this country, and allowing their languages to flourish and binding them together with English. It's what you said earlier about the Derek Walcott poem, the twittering tongues. We're beautiful because of the diversity, you know.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And I think that as immigrants, when you come to a place as an immigrant, you end up living probably in quite immigrant heavy areas, which
yeah,
means you shop at all these mini economies, whether it's the Chinese supermarket, the Turkish supermarket, the Polish supermarket, and those cultures
mm,
bleed into your consciousness and your
mm,
your heritage. They become part of your heritage, they become part of
yeah,
your makeup and who you are. So why
yeah,
wouldn't you begin to cook like them, or flavor your food with ingredients from their
yeah,
culture? it
yeah,
it would be unnatural not to. So when people ask me, well, what kind of food do you do, I say, well, I cook immigrant food. I cook for the food that I cook tells the story of people who have the ache for what they've left behind, but the wonder of their
mm,
new a new landscape. And it's what happens when those two powerful things are reconciled. It's what is created. That's immigrant food.
Precisely. And that comes back to the start of the conversation, the question, what it means to you, what this book means, proudly inauthentic recipes from an immigrant kitchen. And I think you've done a wonderful job in explaining that to us, in penning your childhood memories, some very painful ones as well, but wonderful memories that we can all relate to. You've just mentioned something there about mixing all the different ingredients together, and it reminds me of a conversation we had on here about tarka beans or masala beans, and that is an example of, I'm going to keep coming back to your book here. You mentioned something. What did you say? You said, but for me, it was the distinctive taste and smell of home that I missed the most. Eventually, the hole in my stomach and soul led me into a modest English kitchen with my mother, where we learnt to merge our old and new worlds. We occupied a hinterland where we fused new ingredients with our old traditions, unwittingly creating a new cuisine. That's exactly what the tadka beans are. That's exactly what the sabji sandwich is. In your book, you've described it as the cauliflower curry sandwich. The beauty of women to make something beautiful out of beans, baked beans, which can be seen as a very frugal, I don't like to use that word because food is food, but it's frugal. It's something you just quickly put together.
But it's absolutely true. I mean, often you look at immigrants when they come to a country, they're not economically in the best positions, and a lot of what immigrant food is comes from resourcefulness and
Yes.
being frugal and being economically sort of careful. So absolutely, this is why these things come about. And you see it in cultures all over the world. You look at people like even in America, like the Chinese Americans and stuff, the things that they fuse and cook, it tells a lot about them settling into this great nation of America and opportunity.
Exactly. And it's a classic British thing, baked beans. But we have tarka beans. We add those fragrant spices. And something else I wanted to mention here in the book, you talk about how your nose was acutely attuned to the potency of each spice my mother crushed in her crude stone pestle and mortar. Everything was safe, everything was familiar. And the pestle and mortar, as a tool in the kitchen, it's something that we all are familiar with in a lot of cultures, but specifically, I'd say, Middle Eastern, South Asian kitchens. It's something. You can't take it out of that kitchen. It belongs there. It's such a key tool in the Jikoni, isn't it? Let's see if we've got some questions here as well, Ravinder. You can carry on while I look through if you wanted to add.
Yeah, I think those pieces of equipment like the pestle mortar, they're like the kind of central part of the kitchen. And I certainly couldn't be without mine. I love spices. I always say to people, spices are the backbone of my kitchen, and without them,
100%.
my food would be the culinary equivalent of elevator music. It would just be like one tonal, one note, really boring.
Yeah.
And for me, it's always been about finding interesting ways of using spices and finding unexpected ways of using spices, understanding each spice, what their property is, because if you have a whole spice and then you crush it, its properties change. When you dry roast it, it tastes different. When you fry it in oil, again, it becomes different. Just take a peppercorn. When you have it whole, to when you grind it, to when you pop it in oil, to whether you roast it, it just has completely different nuances. And I think it's about understanding and respecting that spice. And once it's your friend, there's just no telling what you can do with it.
And just to add to that, the way that our families, our mothers, grandmothers, and aunts, they used these spices and understood their chemical properties, the way you've described how they change, whether you roast or fry, whatever. To me, these women were alchemists in their kitchen, knowing just by smelling a spice, how that would completely transform a dish. And like you said at the beginning, andaza, not measuring, just knowing with the eyes. These are such it's very dear to us,
It's very funny. I'll tell you something
Mm,
funny. I mean, my kitchen
mm,
is not, we have people from all nationalities and sometimes nationalities that aren't used to using spices. And I can be
mm.
upstairs and I swear to God, I've got a nose like a bloodhound. Because if someone is cooking spices or burning them downstairs, I'm
You
downstairs
know.
like a shot. I know there is no, there is no fooling me, tricking me. And I work so hard on teaching and training about spices because I think
Mm,
that's like the basic backbone of everything that we do at Jikoni. And so I'm
for sure.
constantly like, look, in Ayurveda they say that a raw spice or a burnt spice is what gives you a bad stomach. You have to understand when it's completely
Its
cooked and
properties.
fragrant, you have to
Mm,
attune your nose to that. And
mm.
sometimes a junior might have like burnt a spice or like taken it too far, and they're trying to tell me it's okay, and I'm like, I know there's no
Yeah,
kidding a kidder. I can see what's
you would
going.
know. If anyone knows, it's you that would know. Just a few minutes left, Ravinder. I don't want it to cut off mid conversation. So let's just look at some comments here. We've got a fan here of yours who watched you on TV. Question here from Gilly Aish. What would you recommend in the new Comfort and Joy menu? The stories behind the food makes it a whole experience. Looking forward to visiting Jikoni, someone has said.
So
Inspiring to see you push borders,
in
with
terms
your
of
food.
the question from Jilly
Hmm.
Ash, so Comfort and Joy, they're
Gilly.
all vegan and vegetarian, and I think each one is so distinctive and unique. We have a Middle Eastern inspired box, an Indian inspired box, a Chinese inspired box. So it just
Wow.
depends what floats your boat, but they're all we've received such positive feedback for all of them. So I'm proud of all of them.
Yeah, thank you for that, Ravinder. Such, yeah, there's a fan here of yours who wishes you the best for your journey ahead. You've always been
Oh,
inspiring people around you. Um,
thank
Trailblazer
you.
of a woman, and we've got people commenting on the different taste methods in grinding as well. What I'm going to do is, we've got 3 minutes, like I said, don't want it to cut off. Please, Ravinder, ma'am, upload some sweet dish recipes.
You
Someone has
have to buy the
requested.
book. There's a whole chapter dedicated to
There is
desserts.
at the back of this book, which is available at Ravinder's restaurant Jikoni in Marylebone and Amazon as well. So you can purchase it. It's her second cookbook, proudly inauthentic recipes from an immigrant kitchen. And I said this yesterday as well, that this South Asian Heritage Month is about shared heritage, and the immigrant stories are our collective stories that make up the nation. Much like that's the reason why I shared Benjamin Zephaniah's poem. And we have to support one another. We have to share one another's stories, and when we do, we get such consolation from that. And I wanted to introduce you to our followers, Ravinder, because we're such fans of yours. And
Oh, and
we just
likewise. I love what you
thank
guys
you.
do.
Thank you, Ravinder. Really appreciate you taking the time out today, and I hope that you are well rested and ready for the kitchen tomorrow. And everyone, please go out and buy this book and support it. I'm not just saying that. I read it in one sitting, and it's such a nostalgic book. It made me laugh, it made me cry, and it's so beautiful. And you can learn to make recipes from there, not just stories. So, Asante Sana, Ravinder, for your time. Thank you so much. And
Oh,
we wish you all the best on whatever ventures you have in the future, and we will continue to support you. But shukriya for your time. Thank you so
thank you,
much.
Santi Sana. Take good care. Bye bye.
Bye.